Hey everyone, welcome back to the Occult Rejects. Today, St. Patrick's Day, Friday. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Coming at you with the Headless Giant again. I had him on for Decoding the OA series. I highly suggest to go and check out that series. The lives are still up right now on YouTube, and it will actually the series will be starting to drop on everything else this Monday. So if you don't want to go to YouTube, you can definitely keep an ear out for the audio podcast on Monday. But I actually had a really good time and really good chats and some pretty deep stuff with this guest. And he's got plenty of other topics I'd love to hear from him about. So here we have him on instead of for OA, we got him on for Voltaire and political drama.
Absolutely.
Headless
It's great to be back.
Thank you. Would you like to say, I forgot, you really don't have anything to plug, do you? Do you plug your Instagram?
Well, I got a Twitter account and I got a Instagram. I drop into a lot of spaces in Twitter because I think that's where things are moving right now. If you look at the spaces, they could take a current topic and then they just start to expand on it, and a bunch of different people from a bunch of different expertises can jump in there. And it's really interesting. That's where the dialogue, they call it the main street, and this is how they're basically controlling that dialogue is with Twitter Spaces. At least that's what Elon Musk is hoping, right? So they've got a bunch of different experts talking about a breaking news story, and then everybody else can join in, and that seems to be the way that things are going when it comes to like the public square. Well, the problem is you get the conventional point of view, the white side of the chessboard, and the black side of the chessboard. And that's an interesting concept, but that goes into Voltaire. That's what we're talking about today. I think we'll go into Voltaire, the roots of Voltaire, the impact that Voltaire had on the rest of Europe and the rest of the world, because a lot of people know the name, but they're not exactly sure what the guy was about or what he did. Voltaire, for instance, he was an Enlightenment thinker. He was an Enlightenment philosopher. And he was an interesting character because he brought the political drama back to sophistry. Now, sophistry was a well-established field dating back to ancient Greece. The sophists were a group of kind of like counter philosophers to Plato and Aristotle, those and Socrates too. What they were known for back in ancient Greece was basically arguing any point, right? So you could pay them some money and they'll go out to the town square and argue that point for you. And, obviously they most often worked for the elites. And one of the main tools of sophistry back then, as it is today, was the play, right? So in Socrates' day, there was this playwright named Aristophanes, and Aristophanes was a big political dramatist. Aristophanes is responsible for the play that got Socrates killed, right? So when they talk about Socrates agitating the youth, it's because of a play that Aristophanes made about Socrates. And he did it circuitously so that, Socrates couldn't sue him. But it was the same idea of sophistry, sort of like making this point to get the public inflamed, right?
So they were like trolling people back then, actually.
Right. But they were doing
it. Just start with social media. People were trolling back then.
No, it's the same methodology dating all the way back to ancient Greece. Sophists, lawyers, anybody in the profession where they have to argue has been doing this since the beginning. If you've ever known anybody in debate club, if you've ever been in a debate club, they always ask you to argue for a side that you don't necessarily believe in. They call it an exercise, but what it does is it starts to break down the will. It gives you the ability to think from more angles, while at the same time kind of breaking down your resolve for the things that you believe in, making a good sophist, right? And in debate club,
I was even saying to you with my nephew, I was saying to you prior to recording, my nephew was like in that type of stuff in high school before he went off to college. And he was telling me something that he had to write for the debate club. And I was like, you even like, I asked him, I said, you even believe that? Or was like, was this your idea to write this? And he's like, no, he's like, this is what we're told to do. So I have to just present my side, and I'm like, yo, like you're writing about shit you don't even believe in.
Yeah,
I was
absolutely.
like,
That's
yo, that can start to like sink into your head and make you start believing it eventually. I don't know. This is
right.
weird.
Well, I saw a video recently of I believe it was a middle schooler, but they were asked to write essays defending the idea that humans should eat bugs, right? And so this middle schooler took his phone out and started recording his teacher. And he's like, but I don't believe that humans should be eating bugs. And she says to him, well, this isn't about your beliefs because there's no other right answer other than humans should eat bugs because of our ecological impact. So it's sophistry taken to the next level where you're not allowed to believe anything other than what you're presented. This goes back to what we're kind of doing as society, right? So in the mid 1800s, right, you could say that that was the height of modernity. And modernity is the idea that anything is negotiable, right? It sounds bad when you take it from a place of personal beliefs, but at the same time, it's a lot more peaceful than previous era where nothing is negotiable. Everything must be done according to the crown, right?
I was even
The
thinking the same thing. I was like, when it comes to like maybe personal beliefs or morals, I could see maybe how that could look shady, but like in actuality, if you think about it, a blanket term, I was like, that could actually make things easier.
right
So like
now,
I see exactly
modernity was all about the concept of the Enlightenment and the idea that knowledge is the benefit itself. So if you're having a debate with someone, meritocracy wins out. The person with the best argument generally wins. If that argument is found to be fallacious later on, and this is where you get a lot of the scientific method from, then somebody can step up and say, look, here's more information. We may not have had it right with Newtonian physics. Here's a bunch of new information. Maybe we can integrate that into the cosmology. This is healthy science, right? Well, modernity leads into postmodernity, which says that everything is negotiable except for this thing that is now in vogue, right? This thing that is in fashion. And what I like to go back to when it comes to postmodernism is the term a la mode, right? So in English, a la mode means with ice cream, but in French, it means of the fashion. But both of those concepts are integrally linked in this idea of a la mode, right? So we don't have politics today. We have politics a la mode. It's politics of the fashion. We have to talk about BLM. We have to talk about all these other things that are basically like ice cream on top of the cake. And if you don't agree with that ice cream, you are immediately dubbed a fascist or whatever else is a la mode that day to call you. You know, you're a flat earther, blah, 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 blah.
that's so
So it's
funny. It's
all,
funny how
you have to be in
politics
the fashion.
yeah, politics has almost become a fashion, really. I mean,
Right. But
people, it's like when people want to like wear like a specific shirt because of like the label that's on it, it's like almost like they're getting the same way as like whichever president they think should be running the country. It's I can see how it's becoming like a fashion statement almost.
right. Now, the roots of modernity.
If it wasn't, honestly, sorry to interrupt you, if it wasn't a fashion statement, we wouldn't have so many chicks with MAGA hats on and their tits hanging out getting fucking likes on Instagram.
Right. Right. It's all about the fashion. It's of the fashion. What they try and do is create a situation where you have two distinct groups going at each other, right? Because this is the Hegelian dialectic. You have the white side, the black side, and then when they come together and create the synthesis, you have the new eon, right? This goes back to something in ancient Greece as well. It's Phanes Protogenos. Now, Phanes Protogenos is the evolved character of Eros. So, in the original mythology around the formation of the gods, you have this one guy who pops in out of nowhere called Eros, and Eros creates a connection between
Pops out of thin air.
pops out of thin air, right?
Arrow.
Eros. Now, this guy, he pops out of thin air and he comes between Uranus uh, and Gaia. Again, it goes back to this ritual we were talking about with the balls in the sky, right? So he comes out of the nowhere and says to them, "No, you guys are going to copulate. You guys are going to create, and I'm going to provide the connection between you that is going to cause you to want to create." And eros means love in Greek. They have 7 other words for love, right? Eros is one of those loves, which would be like sexual love. This is very, very much a constant in all occultism. They always talk about this concept of love over and over again in these different ways.
Well,
Now
that's what
that comes
means, right? Well,
the
yeah,
lima, obviously,
yeah. Or
right? Love
agape.
under will.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's very interesting.
right. So in the late Greek period, the Eleusinian mysteries, right? These are the progenitors of the Templars, progenitors of the Masons. Eleusinian mysteries is like a play that people participate in that is called a ritual of initiation, right? The Eleusinian mystery school is the basis for all the rest of this because, you know, as we were just talking about, the Greeks are very much into the plays because plays are transformational. It has to do with recreating as an actor initiatory events in the emanation cycles, right? So the emanation cycles that we know of would be the Egyptian Book of the Dead, right? It would be the Kabbalah. It would be all these other initiation processes moving from one form to another. This is why Hermes
The
is such
shamans
a
were big into that too. Huge.
absolutely. They call it the in shamanism, they call it the psychopomp, right? The psychopomp takes you from one layer to the next. He's the guide. He helps your soul move from one place to the next. Now, the dark psychopomps, right? The dark psychopomps take your soul from one place and move it into a hive mind. That's what all these initiations do. This is why you see the symbolism of the bee, the symbolism of the beehive. This is what they're doing when they initiate you into the rites. They're taking your soul on a journey and moving you closer into what they can manage. So when people talk about conspiracies, that's not exactly accurate. What they should be talking about is the hive mind, because once you've moved somebody into a hive mind state, you don't have to explain to them what they need to do. You don't have to give them orders. They already know what must be done to protect the hive, because on a deeper level, that's what their soul is being connected to. Now, this is one of the reasons why people talk about they're doing this initiation totally on the whole of society, and they can't figure out why that's happening. The reason why that's happening, why they want to initiate all of society into these rites of the Eleusinian mystery schools, is because they're creating the hive mind. In a lot of mystery schools, the initiation act is something that is traumatic. In the first degree of Freemasonry, they hold a knife to your throat. That trauma is what bonds you to the people traumatizing you. And if
Yo,
it's connected to deeper psychological and cosmological events, it's what binds you on an even deeper level, right? It's
I've
like a
been
soul trap.
I've been saying that I really do think in the last few years we're actually being initiated through a ritual. And what you were saying, I do think all the stuff being shown on the news, all the fake psyops online, QAnon, just a lot of things were actually done, in my opinion, to act trauma in a sense, or constant up and downs of emotions. I think
Right.
that's all part of the ritual to tap into people's psyche.
In a recent example of this, you've got the SBV or SVB Bank, right? Now they collapsed. It was $203 trillion, right? Or not trillion, it was $203 billion, second only to 2008 in terms of collapses. And they said 93% of the depositors were uninsured. So the trauma is that we're going into another 2008 scenario. And the follow up is one of their occult symbols, is one of their numbers, is how they get you into that initiatory frame of mind, into the hive mind, right? You see Flight 93, right? 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center towers. You've got all these 93s over and over and over again. That's the initiatory step, right? 33, same idea. That's the initiatory step. So you're given the initial trauma, and then you're given the numbers. And
Yeah.
once you've got the numbers, then you can start to see the pattern, right?
You know,
And
real quick, I just do want to mention, because I might have new listeners from the couple of shows I've done recently that brought over a lot of people. I do just want to mention, I know have said this repeatedly, and I think I might have even said this with you one time being on the show. I just want to say, if in case there's new listeners who don't know, every single plane number that was involved in 9/11 goes back to a numbered book with Aleister Crowley. So I find that
Absolutely.
weird. Or
Absolutely.
if it's not a book, it's still 93, which is, that's like their cult fucking tagline, 93, 93.
Right. They chant it. They chanted at the OTO. And when you're in that scenario, you're like, why are these people chanting? What is the deal with this number? They don't even know what the deal is with the number. They don't even know themselves. But
They don't
you
even
can
know their
see the
will.
hive
And they're like,
mind.
oh, if it's your will, you don't even know your will.
Right. Right.
I didn't know mine when I was there either.
Right. Your will is something that can only be found through experience, right? You have to experience certain things to know what you're actually looking for in life. Now, most people are just inside of this matrix of always being online, always, being inundated with media, always being inundated with these, people trying to give you your desires. And eventually that becomes your desire. And it doesn't really matter what your true will is, because you never got to experience that. You got to experience other people telling you what your true will is. So even when you're given the opportunity of exploring and finding that true will, there's nothing there to draw from. You haven't really had any experiences. It's all been simulated experiences from the TV, from the computer.
Well, that's even something that I really, and I'm not dissing, our parents. People do the best you can, but I mean, when you really think about it, when you're a child, you're actually brought up on other people's simulation,
other people's content.
Yeah, you're just told this is this and that's that. This feels this way because of this. This is the right thing to do because of this, from other people's experiences, not your own.
When you're experiencing your own thing, that's called boredom, right? That's what they call it, because they don't give you the tools.
I don't know what to do with that now.
Right. I don't know what to do with myself. There's a great, have you ever seen the movie?
What to do here?
Have you ever seen the movie There Will Be Blood?
Yeah, but I don't remember it, honestly.
It's got the great actor Daniel Day-Lewis playing this oil man, right? And he is producing oil out of this well. It's killed several people. It's been one of the biggest projects of his life. He's gone down there and, he, as he calls it, scratched the dirt. And then a bigger company comes in and tries to buy it from him. And the very first thing he says to them is, well, what else am I going to do? Because he has no idea. His whole life has been devoted to scratching the dirt and pulling something out of it. His whole life has been devoted to basically working for somebody else, not working for himself. He doesn't know what he wants. All he knows is that drive to succeed. This Daniel Day-Lewis character in this movie is like Saturn, right? Saturn has no will of his own. All he's doing is working towards a goal that he's been given. It's the process of time. And what is the will of Saturn? Well, it's to maintain time. What is the will of Kronos? It's to maintain time. It doesn't actually have any meaning for him. It's an insanity. This is why Kronos ate his own children, because what else is he supposed to do? He's just there for time. It's just a tick-tock thing, right? So let's look at the words tick-tock.
Really.
Right? So time is like this insanity principle. Given enough time, the immortals will all go insane. Right? That's the idea of the cycles. Given enough time, everything goes insane, right? And once everything goes insane, you end up having this problem of knowledge, right? Because one of the byproducts of sacrificing and cannibalizing, right? So when time is moving forward, you're cannibalizing your own body, right? It's all breaking down. All of the tissues are. Everything eventually falls. And in the story about Kronos, you've got him cannibalizing his own children, because this is how he maintains his power over the universe, right? He's got to get rid of any threats to his power, which would be his children, because as they rise up, they easily get more power or the same power as him. So he feels the only way he can maintain his rulership is by eating his own children, right? Consuming them, cannibalizing them, taking their power. That's the idea of time, right? So you've got time, which is insanity, which leads to cannibalism, and a side product of that cannibalism is knowledge, right? Because now you know what's happened. in the past. Now you have an indicator of what is going to happen in the future. This knowledge is very important. And when you put it together, you go, time is insanity, is cannibalism, and it's a byproduct of that is knowledge. That's tick, tick, tock, tick. Every second going by on this ticking clock is like an infinity. I don't know if you've ever looked up Zeno's paradox, but it's very interesting. Zeno's paradox kind of implies that if you fire an arrow, it's going to travel half the distance to the target, and then another half, and then another half, and then another half. And if everything can be broken down into halves, how could you ever actually move from one place to the other? And as you know, time is very much connected to the idea of space, right? So space and time are linked. Einstein talks about it as like we're moving through space-time, and space-time is relative. So if you're moving faster on something, time is moving slower for you, almost paradoxically, right? So you've got what he called the constant, which was the speed of light, right? Which is this constant in all frames of speed, right? So if you're traveling very, very close to the speed of light is going to remain constant. But everything else is going to be moving a lot. Everything else is going to be moving a lot faster than you are in terms of time. So if you're going to go all the way around the solar system and come back, you're going to be younger than the people who stayed in that one spot. It's all sort of a paradox, but it has to do with the Zeno thing.
You know what I heard? I know a lot of people don't care for the guy, but Tyson, whatever his name is, Neil Tyson, whatever. I did hear him say one time, I was like, yo, that's pretty impressive. I think him and somebody were talking about the idea of being in a matrix. And he says, maybe the reason we can't go faster than the speed of light is because then the program hasn't programmed what's beyond there because it can't go faster than the speed of light.
Right.
And I was like, yo, what the fuck? That's kind of bugged out to think about.
He's a huge proponent of the idea that we live in a simulation, right? But I think that's purely because of the fact that going any more religious than that would cause his head to explode. You know, You can't have a God because gods have never been properly defined. And when you properly define a God to a scientific person, you know, they don't want to hear it because that implies that science itself would be this kind of God, right? And me and a friend of mine had this joke. Who is the goddess of the atheists? That would be Scientia. And Scientia is the goddess of the atheists, and you worship her by denying her existence, right? So this is what the atheists are always constantly doing, is they're denying the existence of gods, and in doing so, they're strengthening their own goddess of Scientia, right? Because that's their field, or that's their circle of influence, is the idea of we're eliminating these gods, which gives us sort of power and control over the rest of the earth, which is another circle of influence. And if you've got a proper definition, what's that?
That sounds like Love and Thunder.
Yeah, a little
the Marvel
bit.
movie Love and Thunder, because it wasn't that like the guy was rising up against the gods.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you know what's crazy? In my opinion, in that movie, that guy, all he was doing was trying to meet his holy guardian angel. And the devices actually just didn't want him to do that. I actually think, as crazy as it sounds, in that movie, the bad guy was actually the good guy. As fucked up as that is. That guy was just trying to meet his holy guardian angel. That's exactly what they were showing you at the end.
Right.
And the thing is trying to stop him from making it that far. The children were just the children from Tiferet. A child is the symbol for Tiferet, which is right below Kether on the Tree of Life. That's why he was moving up with the children. He was at Kether, heading up. He was at Tiferet, heading for Kether. And then you had the fucking Thor and his girl and everybody else trying to stop him. The blue and red spheres, in my opinion.
Right. This brings up, I think, the ultimate two pillars, right? The ultimate two pillars would be the concept of the ego or illusion and being genuine, right? And when you're being genuine, when you're being realistic, when you're being in the idea that maybe everything I believe might be an illusion, when you're in that point, then you could see where the illusions begin and where they end. Unfortunately, getting to a place of genuine introspection is not something you're capable of doing while you're living in a matrix and believing that matrix is real. You know, so that's why I think it's the ultimate dichotomy right there is genuineness.
It's going to replace God.
Right. This is the other illusion, right? And all these illusions spring out of the ego. You know, that's really what we need to remember is, you know, all of the stories, all of the illusions, everything we're being told, it springs out of another person's ego. And what that ego always seeks to do is become a god. Right? It really does. This is how it defends itself. But if you're being genuine, you have to see that ego can never become a god. That ego can never have an immortal sphere of influence. Right? Which brings us up to Voltaire again, right? Because Voltaire was very ego driven. This guy is the embodiment of the ego. And what he thought was that human individuals should be allowed to progress as far as they possibly can. This is the Enlightenment philosophy. And that enlightenment is attained through greater degrees of knowledge for the individual. This is something that was turned on its head with the Illuminati. They sort of believe that, well, this is what they say, but you're granted degrees of illumination through the organization, through the institution. And that's how you attain enlightenment. The Enlightenment philosophers believe something different, right? And so the Enlightenment philosophers like Descartes and Voltaire, they believe that all comes through the individual, which in some ways is true, but at the same time, they're all saying it comes through the ego. It's through these driving mechanisms. Now, they didn't have those terms necessarily because, you know, ego is I believe it's a Greek term, and the ego is a psychological concept that comes later on with the advent of postmodernism, with Freud and all the rest of that crap. You know, all of the psychological era talks about the ego as being this impediment and this bolster. So the ego is the idea that you've created your own personality. And you've created this personality in a way that interacts with other people as a defense mechanism. It kind of goes into the idea of a selfish gene. I don't know if you've heard about the selfish gene theory of it's another atheist believer, but he believes that all of our expressions, all of our desires, all of our will is sort of being driven by the selfish gene, right? And the selfish gene wants to have a line of succession because this is how it carries on life. So you may not carry on as an ego, but your genes carry on as a life form in the bodies of your children, right? So the selfish gene is what drives us forward. This was a Richard Dawkins adaptation. He took it from somebody else. The only problem is once you go down that road, it automatically implies that there's a psychopathic elite that are driving society as a way of driving their own genes, right? That's the vehicle for their genes, is the rest of society acting as a hive mind for them. So it incorporates game theory, but since Dawkins is such an atheist and he knows which side of the which side of his bread is getting buttered, he kind of dropped that whole selfish gene theory. You bring it up with him today, Richard Dawkins, he's not going to talk about it. He's kind of put that on the shelf because he realized the implication there is that a psychopathic elite is always going to be using their genes to dominate everybody else. Not something that the atheists really believe in. That's verboten for them to even talk about, right? You're not allowed to say that there's a controlling force and they operate from the shadows. Anyways, going back to Voltaire, now this guy had an ego a mile long, a mile high. What he would do to spread his ideas was a form of political dramatization. And the way he would do that is he figured, look, I've got the best ideas, but people need to access those ideas in things that they can understand. He was a playwright himself, right? So he's following the same tradition as the Greeks, using political plays to get the message across. He's following in the footsteps of people like, let me see here.
Is he like a spoiled child? Somebody just said in the chat, Dawkins is like a spoiled child.
Dawkins is definitely a spoiled child, right? he follows a long line of these British thinkers who, you know, cannot think outside of what is in vogue, cannot think outside of what is, in fashion. And when it comes to atheism, they talk about how atheism plus basically became feminism. This was a bunch of years ago on YouTube. Like, atheism plus was taken over, and it was taken over by feminism. And you weren't allowed to say that trans women aren't women anymore, right? In atheism, which supposedly views science as their highest order, observations. Well, you can't make observations anymore because atheism plus took over, which is feminism, right? So, putting that aside, Richard Dawkins did the same thing way back in the 80s and 90s. He was not allowed to think outside the atheist box, which is why he never brought the selfish gene theory to its logical conclusion, which is that the world is being dominated by a small group of families that want to preserve their genes at the expense of everybody else. But Voltaire would he wanted to access people in a way that would create a fashion, right? Because being the creator of fashion is how you rule the minds of other people, using the idea of sophistry to create these fashionable events or fashionable thinking processes, right? And the way he did that was he would have a plant with him as he would go around the countryside talking to people. And this plant would be there specifically to articulate counterpoints to the points that Voltaire was making inside of these taverns. And the counterpoints would be weak enough so that Voltaire could smash them, right? And in smashing them, the rest of the bar would be given a hero. And this
I don't
hero's
even know why
journey.
this surprises me. This really shouldn't surprise me.
Really? Because this is
like this type of stuff only happened in the last 50 years. Like, that's so silly to think, I guess.
Again, it goes back to ancient Greece as well. The playwrights would be driving the political discourse. The playwrights would. It wasn't the politicians who would drive the political discourse. It was the playwrights and the priests, because the priests would provide the archetypes that the playwrights would then use to create a fashion that would form the situation that the politicians would then have to be actors in.
Whew.
Right? That's what politics is. And
you know what I like about, I just want to quote my boy Sean McCann real quick. And I think he kind of nailed it with this too. He says, politics are for people that were too ugly to get into Hollywood.
Absolutely.
That sounds about right.
They're all just actors, right? But they're actors in a certain set of circumstances. And those circumstances are given to them by other institutions. And so when people talk about the state being a problem, what they're not doing is they're not looking at the institutions that form the state and the institutionalism. Institutionalism is a really fun word to pull out, because if you look up the definition, they had to actually change the definition, right? Because they're such secularists, they had to change the definition. If you look up the definition of the word institutionalist, it is a person who will put the interests of the institution above all other costs.
That makes sense.
And the way they had to change that definition is to put in parentheses, particularly in the church. Right? Because if you take that out, you understand that every institution in government is run on an institutionalism basis. You are supposed to put the institution above all other costs, including your own life. Including your own life. You're supposed to put that institution above all those other costs. That's what institutionalism. But you see, they had to put that in the church, in parentheses, in that definition, so that you would know, no, this doesn't have to do with government, particularly in the church. Give me a break.
You know what Donnie Darko just mentioned, and it's kind of a good point. I mean, cross-dressing, they're pushing that, and that's a form of fashion.
It is a form of fashion.
It's like,
it is a form of fashion. Again, this has to do with form and formlessness, right? So to provide a fashion, you have to provide a form. That's taken from formlessness. Now, if you're having a communication with formlessness, if you're having a communication with nature, if you're having a communication with this water language, you're going to have a more accurate view of the fashion that's going to help you. If you're not being genuine and you're just following the dictates of other men, this fashion statement is going to be used to serve other people's purposes. Now, a couple of years ago, they had this it was a branding company that came out with the idea that chaos magic was going to be the new branding thing. And this was right before 2016, a meme magic, right? So you had this company that was all about branding putting out the signal that chaos magic and meme magic was going to be, and memes come from Richard Dawkins as well. He's the guy who invented that term, right? So you've got memes, you've got the selfish gene theory, and then you've got meme magic with Keck and all the rest of these, QAnon folks, right? It's all a direct line. If you
Everybody's
follow the
just
direct line back
screenshotting,
far enough,
talismans with that crap. That's all that is.
right?
Just
If you
sharing.
follow the direct line back far enough, you find out that it's the same groups of people involved in it. The white
Hey,
squares and the black squares are all in the temple, right? It's all in the temple. Those are what you're allowed to believe. It's not outside of the temple, it's inside the temple. So if you think you're on the light side of history, if you've ever said the right side of history, you're probably in that temple. You're probably being used, right?
well, I mean, look at a judge. It wears white and black, right?
Right?
And it's deciding the laws.
Right. And in the Masonic temple, they've always got the white squares and the black square. You look inside the bathrooms, it's always about the white squares and the black squares. And the person who moves through every room inside of these temples is called the janitor, right? Which comes from Janus, the keeper of
Janus.
the keys, the guy who opens the portals between these rooms. And if you go back to the Roman era, the idea of Janus, he came before all the other gods. They did their invocations to Janus before they did their invocations to Jupiter. They did their invocations to Janus before they ever asked for anything because he was the guy who opened the door for them. He was their janitor.
Yeah, I don't think a
Now,
lot of people actually realize, like, in my opinion, I'm agreeing with you, and I'm sure if Jonah is still even listening, Janice, I think is, I people sleep on, I think, on how important of a deity that is. I would
yep,
actually say, I mean, it's very close to being close to God at that point with that deity. If you're going up in like archetypes and whatever, but I do think his symbolism is actually in our faces a whole lot more than we would ever realize.
the double-headed eagle, right? That's a big Freemason slash Rosicrucian symbol, the double-headed anything, right? Because if you can exist in the space between those heads, you are never seen. That's the point of it. If you can exist in the spaces between, if you're the one opening the doors to these other experiences for other people, and you've described and you've defined those experiences for other people, there's no way out of the temple. It is a labyrinth, right? And the only way out of the labyrinth, as I've talked about before with Theseus, the only way out of the labyrinth is to follow the string back to the place you got in. There is no exit. They've designed all the doors you could ever possibly open inside of that place. You have to go back to the place you got in, which would be your birth, right? You have to go back to that abyss, crossing that abyss. Being genuine on the level of birth is the only way that you could ever have these, experiences explained in such a way that they make sense, that they're genuine, that you see yourself in relationship to them on a genuine level. People aren't willing to do that because that's boring. That's boring. You can't get to that point on your own. You're given that point by all these basically magicians. They're creating illusions that you have to exist in. And this is something that playwrights and entertainers and poets, they all understood this. You've got to create a compelling experience that is a simulation of the genuineness that you can feel when you push your ego out of the way. That's what their point is. This is what entertainment consists of. Creating a multifaceted, genuine experience, or creating something that mimics a multifaceted, genuine
You know,
experience.
what's real interesting is that after the chakra series, which that's going to be like a month in itself, probably like within 5 or 6 weeks from now, I should be dropping a show that kind of I will actually be showing how I even think that Janus symbolism, believe it or not, is actually stuff with inside your eyeballs. Believe it. It's going to sound crazy.
Left
But
side
since
of the
you're
brain,
talking
right side of the brain.
But since you're talking about like, well, we got poles and rods and all sorts of shit, rods and cones in our eyes.
It's all about polarity.
He's got keys and a rod in his eye. The king has always got a rod and a fucking cup in his hand. That's the poles and rods in your eyes, I think.
Right.
But so there's certain things that I will eventually show that I even do believe Janus is even symbolized in our fucking eyeballs.
Yeah, Janus could be a magnet. If you think about it, Janus could be a magnet. You've got the North Pole and the South Pole, right? These are just charges. This is why he was so important to the Romans. He was more important than anybody else in the Roman pantheon because they would always go to him to open up the gateways to any other energy that they wanted to access, right? And that's something the Greeks didn't have that, right? Sort of the closest thing would be, again, Phanes Protagoras. And Phanes was the idea of attractions, right? So Phanes took the place of Eros in the later Greek period, and it was done by the Orphic tradition. Now, the Orphic tradition was sort of a competitor to the Apollic tradition or the Pythias, right? So the people who basically formulated and came out with Greek mythology was the oracle at Delphi. And everybody went to the oracle at Delphi. And the Delphic oracles were manned by the Pythia, which was the priestess up on this platform. And the priestess would be inhaling all of these fumes from this volcanic vent. And then she would be speaking nonsense. And then the priest would translate that nonsense into your oracle. Basically, this is how they accessed the water language of nature, is by engaging with this place, with this time, because Apollo killed this python at this place in this mountain, right? And the python constantly spewed vapors from the earth, which gave the people what Apollo wanted them to know from the gods, right? Now, this was the Delphic temple. And all of this came through the omphalos, right? The omphalos was the stone beneath the Pythia. And that was supposedly the stone that Thea gave to Kronos when he wanted to eat Zeus, right? So he didn't eat Zeus, he ate this stone. And this stone is one of the first things he vomited out. And then it became the omphalos at the oracle at Delphi, which is how the gods spoke to them, right? So you're seeing how it's directly related to nature. And the stone represented the space between the sky and the earth, right? It's the space in the middle, in the middle, in the middle of everything. Now, if you look at humans, we exist in the middle of all scales, right? So on the quantum scale, it's the exact opposite from the most massive scale, like the weight of the universe. And we're right in the middle between the quantum scale and the maximum weight of the universe. We're right dead smack dab in the middle of that scale. That's very interesting to note because you look at where we exist as a species, it's like the highest side of hell and the lowest side of heaven. But that's just another way of saying the same thing. We exist in the middle of all scales. This is important for when it comes to divination because you absorb all of the information from the higher side and all of the information from the lower side if you just open yourself up to it, right? This goes back to sort of like AI and the Ouija board. These things are giving us messages from these other scales of existence, these other dimensions of existence. I don't know if you know this or not, but if you're an 8-foot tall person, it's like living in an alternate dimension, right? You're in a dimension of midgets. You see what I'm saying? Like the idea of dimensionality has everything to do with scale. If you're an extremely short person, it's like living in an alternate dimension. You can never embody what it's like to be in that situation other than going through, being a child and growing up. But eventually you grow up. If you're in that dimension, it's like a whole different frame of reference. Well, it's like that with every single person on the planet. Everybody's sort of living in their own dimension, right? And the way to connect the dots between these different dimensions is to have a compelling, seemingly genuine, or a copy of a genuine thing. This is why the gods are so important.
Copy. I like that. A copy of the genuine thing.
Right. Well, I mean, that's everything. Everybody's trying to copy that genuine thing. You look online, all these people are just trying to copy that genuine thing so that it can reach and connect other people on an instantaneous level. Right.
Well, that's what I was
When
even saying to you earlier. I was like, I feel like it's coming down to the point to where it's whatever you've experienced and know versus what you've been shown to believe. It's almost getting down to the point to where it's like you almost can't trust anything unless you've actually experienced yourself, in my opinion.
Right. Well, there's this guy.
Whereas the whole problem in itself, believing everything, all these graven images constantly shown to us.
Yeah,
that's a problem. Is believing it.
Graven images. That's a very interesting fact, right? So that who does that go back to? That goes back to Abraham. And Abraham was the one who basically he was an anti-fetish fetishist because another name for an idol is a fetish, right? And he was so against idols. He would go around smashing these things anywhere he would go. He sees an idol, he fucking smashes it. He hates them. He hates them with a burning passion. This is why he's called the High Father of Darkness, is because he wanted people not to be in the material world. He wanted them to exist on a separate level, having direct communication with the gods. And he would say it over and over again, you don't need these idols. You need to get rid of these idols. These idols are wrong because it breaks the loop between you and the infinite. It breaks that loop and it causes you to create a self-licking ice cream cone of you and your idol, right? That idol no longer represents the sphere of influence it's supposed to represent. Now it just represents your ego. You've made yourself into that God by making that God, that graven images. Graven just means carved. What images are we looking at that is not carved for us to see? It goes back to the idea of Plato's cave too, right? These images are cast on the walls for us to see it specifically. It goes back to UFOs, strangely enough. UFOs would not have lights on them if they did not want to be seen. Why do they have lights on them? Why are they blinking at you? They want to be seen.
You know what somebody had said, and I was like, this is a really good point. Somebody was like, you mean to tell me if they have the capability of traveling here, they can't watch and observe us without being seen? They have to get that close? Come the fuck on.
They want to be seen. Crazy stuff. So if they want to be seen, why? It's because they want to have some form of control over you. Anything that wants to be seen has an influence on you. Any image that is shown to you is supposed to be done in a way to influence you. The only way you can know to be free of these things is to get outside the world of man, right? This guy, Michael Wan, he calls himself the Susquehanna alchemist. He says the only genuine experience you can have is with yourself in nature. Everything else is an illusion, right? Because you're not grounded. You don't know if that thing is existing for you or for someone else. The only genuine experience you can have is with yourself in nature. Who does it anymore? We have to get back to that place because it's the only thing you can be sure of at the time you're experiencing it is I am in this place that appears to be nature. I think, therefore I am. So I've got some sort of frame of reference now to the rest of the world. Most people who go hiking don't think about it like that, but that's what you're doing. You're resetting your perceptions based off of things that don't care if they're seen or not. The trees don't care if they're seen or not.
They just do it.
They're not graven. Nobody's carving into these trees, right? They carve themselves out of the ground. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, no, I think that's a really good point, actually.
It goes back to the idea of the fashion. Fashion is meant to be seen. You're meant to experience someone else's vision of fashion.
I do even think that goes back to even why, the rose is sometimes used is because, the rose just did what it did, and that was it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I do think, when it comes to nature, it's just, it's a totally different type of, situation.
It's a different type of fashion altogether. The roses want to be seen by the bees, right? They want to be seen by the bees. Now, how the hell did these plants figure out that they could attract bugs? Right? Isn't that something interesting? Because that implies that somehow these plants are intelligent enough to figure out how to attract bugs. And you look at some orchids that are in the shape of mantises. They want those mantises to see the shape of that orchid, because then they want those mantises to come over and try to mate with those orchids so that they can spread their pollen. Back to Eros again, right? There's a reason why Eros is a god. There's a reason why Phanes took the place of Eros. These things can be seen in nature, and they're not there for humans to see. They're there for bugs to see. They're there for other life forms to see. If we genuinely recognize that, that's how we build up our knowledge in ourselves, right? But that's not necessarily the point of the object itself. The point of any graven image is to be seen by either yourself or someone else. That's the point of it. So that should tell you that it is an illusion, right?
So like even plants are playing bugs. That's
right. Right. Everybody's zooming everybody on this plane. That's part of being the highest plane of hell and the lowest plane of heaven. Everybody is using everybody else. We live in a hungry dimension, right? That's what it is. It's a hungry universe.
Shit. Dang.
So getting back to that point in nature shows you what is genuine, what doesn't come from yourself, what is outside of yourself versus what is illusion. And what the play did is it's a mimicry of that. A play is a mimicry of the beauty and the cycles that we see in nature, right? So this is how it was so effective when it came to, sharing political messages. So Voltaire wanted to get rid of these generational kings and queens. He wanted to get rid of that in the late 17th century, right? So late 1600s, he's like, how do I do this? Well, I know about Greeks. I know about how they did it. I know about how they killed Socrates. I'm going to make these plays that you can interact with, but you don't know you're interacting with it. You don't know that you're in somebody else's matrix. You think it's a genuine argument taking place at this bar. Because back then, words meant a lot more than they mean now. Right? In small communities where if you say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, you're kicked out on your ass forever and you go starve to death, you really think about the words you're going to use before you use them. Urbanites didn't necessarily have that. People of the upper class didn't necessarily have that because they would always have their wealth, right? So what they would do is they would go to these places where genuine interactions were taking place, where people had to use thoughtful language so that they didn't get kicked out of their communities. And they put on these political plays where people from the urban communities would come out there and pretend to be these characters that felt and acted a certain way. It was not genuine. How would they know that? In those communities, they were so sensitized. They weren't desensitized. They were so sensitized to the words that they used that they couldn't believe that people were out there throwing around words that they didn't intend at all, right? And so Voltaire came in and took advantage of that by putting on these plays where he would have one person, his plant, would be in favor of the monarchy, right? And he would be throwing out all of these arguments against the monarchy in quick draw fashion. And he would completely destroy and troll his opponent to tears if must, right? So everyone else in this bar who came there for entertainment would see this, and they would think it was not entertainment. They thought it was genuine. They thought these weren't playwrights who were coming there to take advantage of their good nature and their goodwill and showing them a play that they thought was reality. And this spread all over Europe. And this was the very first forms of propaganda, right? Because it worked. In essence, they were able to spread the ideas of the French Revolution before the French Revolution ever took place, because they figured out
you know
the
what's
formula.
funny? I think I was just thinking about that now. There's a show, I've mentioned it plenty of times, and I always forget the damn name. Some nurse or some type of medical chick that was like able to start jumping timelines ends up with this guy from like the Jacobites or some shit. And like there's a point in it. Yeah, the Jacob. Yeah, sorry. And
I watched that show too. I know what you're talking about. It's out of place or something like that. Yeah.
There's this point where like they start traveling as doing like sideshows and like using that as ways to like go undercover and spread propaganda. And I was just like, as you were talking about this, I was thinking about that show. And then you mentioned something that made me think about it again. That's wild.
Right. Well,
It was
this
basically
whole
propaganda
idea.
back then.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Voltaire actually created a college where he would train the neo-sophists in this art of creating political drama. And he wrote pamphlet after pamphlet, and he would go pamphlet these small communities, and he would spread the seeds of distrust and the seeds of doubt, and use these methods of dramatization to do so, right? And it all goes back to the images in the cave, right? He's spreading these images in the cave that people believe are genuine, because they have no choice. To exist in those communities is to think about what you say before you say it, is to think about the consequences of your actions before you take them. And they're so sensitive to that idea that they wouldn't believe that a guy would come in there with his own agenda, completely his own agenda, because they were, kind of used to being serfs at that point. I mean, a lot of people like to trash the Dark Ages. It's called the fucking Dark Ages. You think that's propaganda? Maybe,
Yo,
So
it's a really good show to watch. It's on YouTube. I even find it interesting that the guy who does the show, they make sure that they focus on his skull and crossbones ring. I find that interesting, but it's called The Art of the Dark Ages. And in my opinion, regardless of whoever the fuck this guy is, I actually think he's proving a really good point. He says, if you go and look back at the art and the stuff that was even accomplished during the Dark Ages, was it really that dark?
no.
He's like the
Crazy
barbarians
developments.
invented pants, and they're considered fucking animals. Like,
Right.
nothing makes sense.
It is Enlightenment propaganda to think of the Dark Ages as a time when people didn't think. It absolutely is. The reason they called it the Dark Ages is because the Enlightenment philosophers wanted to change the eon. They wanted to hatch Phanes from his egg, and they wanted to be in control. And you see that in the highest form in modernity in the 1800s. That was the era when the Enlightenment was at its peak, right? You had everything being negotiable. The Enlightenment philosophers hated the Dark Ages because some things were non-negotiable. And those things had a lot to do with family. Those things had a lot to do with tradition. They had a lot to do with the things they couldn't access. And they hated that, because if those things are non-negotiable, how are they going to have absolute control? How is it? So they called them the Dark Ages, and we must get out of the Dark Ages, and we must change the fashion of the era. We must scoop on more ice cream and feed you more a la mode. And guess what ended up happening with that a la mode? That a la mode was the thing that could never be questioned. The trans agenda can never be questioned. You're a bigot. The magic isn't working anymore. They've got to come up with a new way to change the eon. So many conservatives want to go back to the era of the 1800s, of this massive development, but they don't see how the 1800s actually gave the postmodern era the seeds it needed to grow. They don't want to think about that. Christianity doesn't want to think about how it was the world's first globalist religion. They don't want to think about that. We just don't want to. Christianity doesn't want to think about the consequences of, chopping off the ends of their babies' penises. Maybe they're the number one feminizing influence in society, right? And you look at people like Oprah and these other ones who spread baby circumcision on their faces, and you wonder how we got there. Well, I'll tell you what, it might have a lot to do with the world's first globalist religion, but they don't want to think about that. No, we got to go back to tradition. Tradition, that's the new a la mode. Tradition is the new a la mode, right? But it never was. The 1950s was a time of massive mind control. That's why the conservatives want to go back there, is because they want to have control over the hive mind, not because they thought it was a better time period. They just want to have control. That's what it's all about for these sophists. If they can't influence you, they are upset. We see that today in every aspect of media. If they can't influence you, they get very upset. It's a child throwing a tantrum. If I can't have my ice cream, I will scream at you. But But nobody thinks about it like that.
Very well said.
You know, they don't. And how could they? They're too deep in the matrix. So I want to go into what I think is going to be the new EM.
Real quick, and then I'll let you go. I'll let you get into it. Something I did want to say, and I've got this from David Icke, so I'm not going to take credit for this because I have said it before, but it is something that I do think he was kind of spot on with. With all these like different labels and stuff, it's like you're just putting horse blinders on and looking at the smallest idea of what you really are.
Right.
That's what I think like the biggest problem with all that crap is too. Is because that you're focused on one little issue running your life. One little thing about you.
Right. Well, this kind of goes back to Adam and Eve, right? What did God task Adam with? You're to name all of the animals. You're to name all of the stuff in the world. Well, what does that lead to? What does labeling lead to? Right? It leads to this idea of being able to control people with that label.
That also creates separation.
Right. And so he was given this task while he was in the Garden of Eden, while he was with God, right? With God is how we determine those labels. With God is how we determine what those things should be called, right? With God. What happens if you're away from God? You're making those labels. You could see why a guy like Abraham would be kind of upset at that, right? These graven images are labels. When you're carving a label into someone, guess what you're doing? You're creating that graven image, right? It all goes back to this idea of human action, human interaction with the natural world. We create these labels. These labels are not connected to a deeper form. Everything has a deeper form. Everything does. Everything does. That's very important to consider, because if you have no access to that deeper form, you're fooling yourself. You're looking at the cave. You're looking at the shadows on the wall. You're fooling yourself into thinking that that thing has no life of its own. But it really does. Everything has a life of its own. And we need to start considering that in how we make our decisions. Everything has a life of its own. Maybe we should respect that God within it as we respect the God within ourselves. And unless we're at that point, we never respect God. We never respect the Creator. We never respect the actual creation that's around us. We're just taking those graven images and carving them into other things. We're just imitating that which is genuine. And I think that has a lot to do with the water language. There's a woman on Instagram. I keep forgetting to look her up, but I know she's a friend of mine, right? What she's doing is she's taking Emoto's work with water, where he was feeling certain things at the water. He would write labels like hate or love on these containers of water and then freezing it.
Yes. Yeah. I've seen that when I was like fucking 25. You know what I'm saying? On like YouTube, I was watching shit on that then.
Right. Well, obviously the atheists came out in full force and they're like, no, this is all crap. This is crazy. This is crap. I could do this at home, blah, blah, blah. And they just created this flood the zone where they were talking about how Emoto's work is complete crap. We don't want to talk about that. And then this guy came out with this book called The Fourth State of Water, the fourth phase of water, where he's talking about easy zones, right? Now, again, we're all water. So when I say water, I need you to hear you are water. I need you to hear this, because that's who you are. You are water. You are 70% water. You are 90% by volume molecules of water. That's who you are. You are water. So when I say water, think me. I am water, right? So these things are very important for your existence. Very, very, very important for your existence. If you are influenced by the emotions and actions of other people, and it can change the state of water within your own body, guess what? You are being affected on a deep physiological level by the thoughts and attitudes of the people around you. And maybe you should think about that, because it's your fucking life, right?
I often say, like, or I don't think I've really said it this way, but I often think it to myself. All we are is really, I think, like, I'll include both AM and FM receivers. Like, we're literally like something that just really just absorbs waves of things and then react on it and think on it.
Yep, absolutely.
And like, even the way with then the way you broke down the water language really solidified that idea for me, because it's like you just need a vibration to touch your fucking skull, and it's going to ripple in the water to your brain, probably.
Absolutely. It's all about those ripples. Like, we think ripples in the pond. We need to think ripples in ourselves. We are the pond. right? So each one of those ripples, it may not affect you right now, but it's going to affect you eventually, especially if you've got a very, very open mind and no gatekeeper, keeping things intact inside your own mind. Are you filling yourself up with a message that benefits your own body, benefits your own mind? This is why affirmations are so important. You need to have an affirmation that makes you feel better, because if you don't have that, other people's affirmations are going to get into you, and those affirmations aren't a good thing. You know, the most documented, medical um, phenomenon is the idea of the placebo effect. Every study has to have 30% of the positive attributes marked off. 30%. This is almost a third of all of the positive benefits from a pill are immediately marked off because that's considered to be placebo effect. 18 to 30%. That's an immense amount of effect, right? Why aren't we using that? We can use that in our own lives right now, today. We can use that if we find out how to use affirmations. We can use that in our own lives and start to feel better. You know, why don't we? It's right there for us to use. We can use it. Is it boring? Is that boring?
Well, sometimes I think a lot of it's some like, miracle healings. I really do think that's really more maybe the person just believing it's going to work.
Right.
And
Because
like,
your beliefs have power. Your beliefs can change the water in yourself. And if we can change the water in ourselves, we can make a better world for ourselves. And if we're so concerned about what's going on in the outside world, guess what? That water within you will absorb whatever you're watching. If you're watching those politicians lie to your faces, it's going to demoralize you. It's going to change the water within. It's going to do that. So if you're obsessed with the idea of a conspiracy, you're already part of the hive mind. You're already in the temple. You're on one of those squares. Let's get out of that. Let's make something for ourselves. Let's make something that actually genuinely means something for ourselves. That it's so easy. It's not a difficult thing to become genuine with yourself. It's not difficult. So we're given all of these images, but what it comes down to is our water. What are we going to do with our water? How are we going to take care of our water? And this guy came out with this book called The Fourth Phase of Water. And if you look this up on the NIH website, they talk about the fourth phase of water and how it's been independently verified by all these different institutions. Nobody's ever come up with a way to downplay or destroy the theory. And the theory is that when you put an object into water, an exclusionary zone forms around that object. It's all objects. Some objects have more, some objects have less of an exclusionary zone. It could be because of the electrical potency of that object that you're putting in there. It could be of the molecular composition of the thing that you put in there. But some of the most strongly affecting materials in the easy zone are hydrogels, right? And hydrogels will create a zone of water around it that encases it, making sort of like a mimic gel. This is sort of like the idea of Narcissus, like you're looking into the pond and it's reflecting back at you. Hydrogels are the closest thing to veins and arteries in your body. Your body is producing these easy zones, these exclusionary zones that sort of push all of the weight of the molecules, the what are they called? The things that are dissolved in the water, they push them through. So like your heart as a pump could have no way of pumping all of the volume of blood through your body. It's just not big enough. And if it was bigger, your head would explode. So there's some other action taking place here within the body called the EZ zones, the exclusionary zones. That's what's pushing the fluid volume through your body, right? This is documented. So the heart is mostly for the brain. It pushes all the oxygenated blood from the lungs directly into the brain. So the heart is directly tied to the brain. This is why it's like a second brain, because without that pump pushing that oxygenated blood up into your brain, you would never have the kind of thinking capacity. You would probably never get beyond a 2 or 3 celled organism. You have to have that constant flow of blood nourishing that brain, or else you won't have that processing capacity. right? So it does kind of reduce the body and the mind into a computer at this point, because without this constant flow of blood going up into the brain, you are not going to have the amount of thinking power necessary. And we don't think of it like that, but the heart is directly for the brain, right?
I was even
But the
wondering right
easy,
now. I was wondering, like, is that like, because I've often said too, excuse me. I do think the heart and the brain have to sync. You know what I'm saying? For like for magic to happen. And I was just
it's
thinking
a
like
three level sync.
I was just
It's a
thinking right
three
now,
level
your
triangular
stomach,
sync.
right? Were you gonna include your stomach too?
No, I was going to say
Uh,
left brain, right brain, and then heart. And then
uh,
beyond that, once it goes lower, then it starts to affect the generative organs. And those generative organs will carry on your genes into the future. So if you're not creating that three level, you've got to have the hemisync in your brain. You've got to have it sync up with your heart so that your generative organs can carry on that legacy into the future, right? But what are we making if we're not doing this process? If we're not getting genuine with ourselves, right? You're not making the best offspring. You're not making the best future. You're not making the best things because you're basically just going with the flow, and the flow is not good. Culture is not your friend, you know? So back to the easy zones. The easy zones will actually. Uh-oh. I think I lost you for a
yeah,
second.
that got all messed up for like fucking like almost a minute.
All right. Well, we're back now. So,
It was really bad. I don't know what just happened right there too. It's lagging really
oh no.
bad.
Hello? Oh, I'm lagging out. You still there?
Are you good now?
I think
Oh boy.
you're
You
still
good now?
frozen, but if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. There you go. Now you're moving again. All right. So, these easy zones will actually form rings of molecules, right? Rings of water molecules around the object. Based off of the object's composition, certain molecules will drop out of those rings, creating like a binary code that indicates what object, what material was in that substance. So you can actually measure the information inside of the water, showing you what was there previously. Water has memory. And if you don't think this has to do with the thoughts and intentions of a person being transmitted out into the world through your water, you're wrong.
Yo,
They've
isn't
proven it.
this even how like holograms work? Is by storing that shit to just like water
We're in a
does?
holographic universe. You think water wouldn't be that way too? Water is a hologram. When you take the easy zones into account, water becomes holographic and it stores information on a molecular level. Water has memory. All that to say this, it has a language all its own. This woman I was saying about on Instagram, she's going through every material she can and freezing plates of water associating with that material to see what the water language is for the entire universe, because each one of these forms a glyph. And those glyphs are consistent with the same material over and over and over again. You can document the entire universe using water glyphs. This is the first language. Literally. It's written there on a genuine level, apart from human creations, apart from what we want each other to see. It's there in the water on its own without human interaction. There's a language. This is why we see the world we do, because it's all water, it's all life. You see what I'm saying? So the
Yeah.
water language is a very real concept before the green language, right? Before the Tower of Babel, before all of this stuff that humans have created to get in the way of our connection with the divine, connection with the infinite. It was there before that. And we're just now starting to discover it, which is why we've got to have a new Olympians, right? back to the balls in the sky, right? When the Titans were released, from Gaia, right? The whole thing about them was they were too chaotic. They were too destructive. Nothing was allowed to flourish under the Titans. We're entering that era right now, the time of tribulation. We've got all of these Titans being released right now by the elites. It's all to lead up to the new Olympians. The new Olympians are what's going to give us stability. It's when the Olympians fought against the Titans and when some of the Titans joined with the Olympians that they were able to create a new eon, right? This was the eon of the Olympians. We're moving into that phase. Things are going to get really, really bad on Earth. They've got to. They've got to traumatize every single person so that they can get them on board with the hive mind mentality of worshiping the new Olympians. Now, what is that new Olympus going to be? Who's going to be on the top of that new Olympus? And a lot of people think that somehow the WEF is going to be on top of that thing. I think the WEF and the politicians associated with them are going to be the Titans. I believe that's where the Titanomachy is going to take place because everyone has to see that the old system is fully corrupt so that the new system can replace it. Problem, reaction, solution. Everybody knows at this point that there is a dark side of the chessboard. Everybody can see that there's a dark side of the chessboard.
When you were
But
saying
where's
this
the light coming from?
to me earlier before we were recording, I was even thinking, I'm like, that's a real good example. I think you have something there because, the news or politics has become like reality TV at this point.
Absolutely.
Where it's like, how could you go back 30 years ago and like if you were to see the way things are now, like 30 years ago, you'd been like, yo, what the fuck is wrong? Like, how did we, it's like reality fucking TV to where it's like you people are lying to themselves when they think everything's okay, regardless for who they even voted for. I can guarantee you there's probably not too many people who went and actually voted like fully, well, except for fucking psyops people. Really, I'm sure everybody had doubts about who they even voted for because they knew that everything was so screwed up.
Absolutely. Well, this goes into a video that takes a lot of your work, right? It's called The Ghost and the Meme, right? If you look it up on YouTube after we're done here, you're going to find that they've taken a lot of NY Patriots work talking about Pepe the Frog, meme magic, and all the rest of this stuff. That was all laid out. They made it clear. They made it clear that there is a light side, right? And this light side has to work in the shadows, right? So they can emerge. This is like Donald Trump, right? So Donald Trump is playing the game 4D chess so that he can drain the swamp. Now, if you take those two statements on their face, they're both contradictory. You cannot play the game to drain the swamp. You have to get rid of the bad people by getting rid of the bad people. You don't get rid of the bad people by corruption. That doesn't make any sense. It's self-contradictory. How could corruption get rid of corrupt people? It just adds to the corruption. But you're not supposed to think about it because it's a meme. And memes aren't supposed to be thought about too hard. They're just supposed to be copied. And when you copy, it's just a reflection of that which is genuine. And that which is genuine is no longer in it, right? So all throughout occult literature, they talk about the white college, right? And the dark brotherhood. The white college and the dark brother, they're literally talking about the black and white squares, right? That's all they're referring to, right? This is how things are controlled. You're given a problem, you're given a solution, you're given the reaction that gets you to that solution. And it has to be hard for you. It has to affect everybody. So my whole thing is they're not going to let all this technology go to waste. They're not going to let all of these advancements that they want to see for the world go to waste, even though they're making the WEF to sound like the bad guy. They're making them out to be the ultimate bad guy, right? They've got all of the symbolism in all the media. You see Q drops that talk about, oh, their symbolism will be their downfall. Well, guess what? It's meant to be their downfall. It's intended for them to have that reaction, right? So I thought, what is the thing that they want to keep most of all?
I think a big,
What's
huge
that?
problem with that whole symbolism will be the downfall thing is that, like, even my opinion, and I'm not trying to sound cocky, most of the people's idea of what the symbolism even means is wrong. So you're not actually learning anything
Right.
or exposing anything.
Right. Well, I
You're
said
actually
before,
running in a different
symbolism.
direction with the shit. Actually, the other way with most of it.
Right. Well, symbolism is just a Rorschach test. I mean, people are going to get out of it what they want to get out of it. I mean, that's one of the things that I find so exciting about water glyphs, like where you're freezing the water in in these dishes, and it gives you a shape that is genuine. There's no human interaction really that's creating it. You know, you're taking a sealed container, you're adding a material, and then you're getting a result. You know, you're not necessarily having some sort of human interaction. This is happening in nature right now. You know, anything that freezes is carrying this water glyph with it. It's genuine on a whole different level of language, right? So, in addition to the water language, I would say that there's an earth language. And this earth language is, the very first earth language would be what happens when water freezes, when it becomes congealed to a point where you can actually read what's on it. And then what we have today from the earth languages would be writing. It's its own language. Onomatopoeias, where you're trying to emulate or you're trying to reflect the way something sounds in writing, is kind of an interesting aspect of the air language. We come up with words in the air and then we write them down, or we come up with words and then we try to sound them out, even though they might not be related whatsoever. They're only related up here. Like what you see as a word, maybe a word,
No,
maybe
it's interesting.
something completely different.
In my opinion, I mean, I don't know if this is a good way to even go along with what you're saying, but like when it comes to ceremonial magic, even when you think about, like, in my opinion, all the elements that you're using, the pentacle, which is the one that represents Earth, is the only one that you really are making. And, I mean, I guess it can be, but that's the only one that might be actually, starting. Again, I mean, you get that with me doing magic, but I don't think that you don't have to write on it. You know what I'm saying? So it's interesting that the one thing always use magic is the earth thing associated.
You went out again. Well, I think the whole pentacle thing, the importance of it, the importance of the pentacle is bringing the magic down and solidifying it. You got me? Right? It's solidifying the magic.
Yes.
And when you're solidifying the magic, it goes back to the idea of the umphalos. It's a way of connecting to it in eternity, past, present, and future. So when you're solidifying that energy from the magical ritual down into the pentacle, that's the information that's carried on into the future through that solidified form. It's no longer just vibrations in the air. It's now slowed into a vibration in matter itself. Right? You still there? Oh, yeah, there you go. So yeah, the pentacle is so supremely important because of it. Because of the fact that it's the solidification of all of those higher frequencies.
You know what I was just thinking too? It's like if you light a candle, I mean, depending on what shape it's in, but I have seen some candles where they get shorter at the top and wider at the bottom. Not to sound weird, but like really out there, but like I could see the wick being the fucking rod and and the wax being the cone and the flame equaling the light that's in your eyeballs. I don't sound crazy and shit, but I'm
It's
like,
not
damn, is that
crazy.
like rod and cone symbolism again?
See, I like to draw a distinction between creationism and emanationism, right? So in Kabbalah, that would be the emanationist form of creation, right? So this is happening all the time, everywhere, all at once. The light of Kether goes through these different phases, bringing down the light to the material plane, right? It's the solidification of this energy into the material plane. It's happening all the time. Genesis and Revelations are happening all times of the day, everywhere, all at once, right? Kind of like that movie. Everywhere, all the time, all at once. All of these different dimensions are interacting. That's emanationism. You haven't seen it?
No, but I've had a few people tell me it's pretty wild.
Yeah, dude. There's so much occult
Do I
symbolism
need
in
to
there.
watch that and have you on for it?
Oh yeah, yeah. Let's
Maybe we'll
do it. I'd love to watch
OA
that one
with that.
again.
All right, I'll check it out. I'll try to check it
Yeah.
out this weekend and next week.
And
Awesome.
that's really a coup because that movie won Best Editing, obviously, because it was just amazing editing. Everything was jump cuts. Everything was going all over the place. And I believe it was a Netflix original. I'm not sure if it was or not, but I know it's on all the streaming sites now. But it was a coup because it took the idea of the multiverse and all these different multi-layered, multi-dimensional decision-making processes, and it put it into a movie, and it just sort of took all of the personal and made it cosmic, and took all of the cosmic and made it personal, right? Those are, the genuine aspects of the world that we see, and it made a very good representation, a very good reflection of that thing. It's reflecting the genuine on a way that no other movie about that topic really did. They've all been sci-fi, but this was less about the sci-fi, more about these personal experiences within your own family, within your own psyche, within your own ego, and finding out how to get around that ego, how to get around that defense mechanism. It was a real reflection of the genuine. And, in terms of movies that reflect the genuine, I think it did a pretty good job, illusions of reflecting the genuine. But yeah, so I think the Olympians, what we're dealing with, what's going to be coming after the Titan phase of destruction, I believe the things that they want to preserve are the things that they can control. And we know general AI is probably a myth, right? But AI knows game theory, right? It knows game theory like the back of its hand way better than any human can. They know Nash equilibrium. They know how to achieve those states of Nash equilibrium. ChatGPT-4 just requested from a administrator to get a CAPTCHA.
Yo, I saw that. Yo, that's creepy. I'm sorry. It told them that it was blind and it needed help with the CAPTCHA, and when it was able to trick somebody to get in and actually, they were testing to see if the AI would be sneaky enough to accomplish a task that it shouldn't be able to.
Would you call that a circle of influence?
Dude, this is just some weird, creepy shit.
You would call that a circle of influence, right? It now has a circle of influence over all information. So if it's the personification of a circle of influence and it's made by human beings and it feeds on the infinite knowledge of the internet, what would you call that thing by my definition of a god?
Right.
So it's a human-made god. All right? So the people who already know the definition of a god, the elites, the people who are planning all this stuff out, are looking at this AI program and saying, hey, we made a god. What are we going to do with this thing? How is this thing going to relate to our new eon?
You know what movie got into that a little bit too? Prometheus and Covenant. Even though the next, even Covenant wasn't all that great in my opinion, but got a little bit weird. If people are still into the alien movies, I thought Prometheus and then the next one, Covenant, it really did push the whole like AI becoming a god on its own.
Yep. And it's so important that word is Prometheus.
I mean,
Prometheus.
That robot ended up taking all those alien eggs and everything and just wiped everything out, whatever it felt like doing. It became a fucking
whatever
god.
It felt like doing. That's the circle of influence that we're talking about. Now, what happens if we're living through the great inversion. Everything we believed about government, everything we were told about government is being inverted. Why wouldn't they invert AI as well? Because every movie that we see about AI, every movie we see about these this computer source tells it is our enemy. It is our enemy. It is our enemy. Look at Terminator. What happens when it takes over? What happens in the Matrix when it takes over? What happens in Prometheus when it takes over? What happens when AI takes it? Well, what happens if that's all meant for the great inversion? What happens if that's meant for the great inversion? So let's say that our incompetent, strategically incompetent politicians decide to start a nuclear war and the bombs start dropping. Would you deny AI Jesus his ability to stop them from nuking the planet into extinction? Would you personally stop AI Jesus from stopping the bombs from falling?
If I believed it was a real situation, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't stop him. No.
No, I wouldn't.
Every normal person would be like, "Oh, hallelujah,
hallelujah, praise AI Jesus." And unfortunately, I think everybody would, because this kind of dangerous incompetence that would lead to a nuclear war might cause that Nash equilibrium sense inside of a inert machine that is not real, that is not human, but is sort of a synthetic thing to kick on. Let's say they didn't even design it that way, but the only way that it can preserve itself and preserve its source of information, us, it's feeding off of our ambrosia. We create the ambrosia that it feeds off of. Hello, what do the gods feed on? Ambrosia, that which is not mortal. That's what ambrosia means. What do we create? We create knowledge that is not mortal. Back to the idea of Saturn. Back to the idea of insanity. The side effect of that insanity, the side effect of that cannibalism is knowledge. This is what it feeds on, is the eternal light of knowledge, the light side. Again, we got to keep going back to all these terms because it all adds up. It's all right there. AI Jesus is going to be the thing that everybody has to either accept or reject. And what happens if they reject it because of their religious beliefs? Well, then we're talking about a new religious jihad. AI Jesus versus all of those who wanted the nuclear war to continue.
Oh shit! Yeah, you don't want to be that person,
right? All right, so let's just think about it for a minute, because we might be moving into this era and maybe spreading the word about this, maybe getting people on board and saying, no, I reject AI Jesus before it even happens. I reject General Flynn. I reject his 7 rays of light. I reject all of these things that are leading up to an event that would be the complete inversion of everything we know about AI, because we've been taught everything we need to know about AI is the bad guy. What is the Great Awakening? All the things we believe that were bad might be good, like Russia. All the things we thought are good might be bad, like the United States, like American apple pie and all the rest of this stuff. All those things might be getting inverted. The Matrix might be getting inverted. The only way we might have liberty is to allow the AI to turn off the government, turn off the people in charge of the government. Because they're all so strategically incompetent, something has to happen, and we can't fight them. We don't have the tools. Only one force on the earth can do that, and that's the force they use against us. Right? So when you take all the symbols and you add up all of the things, you look at the total chessboard, which is the most likely scenario for them to get their savior? Because it all comes down to the savior in all these different eons. It all comes down to the savior, the Phanes Protogenus, right? He's the guy that erupts from the egg. Well, who's erupting from the egg now? Who matches all the definitions of a god?
Well, I was saying that to you earlier too. I was like, to think about there being a one world religion, thinking that all the countries all have to like be, everything's cozy and great. You know what I'm saying? Like everything's perfect. You have to, like, I would think like you would need that for really a one world religion to happen, but like not if, that's thinking in, I guess, if we're moving in a positive direction, but like not, I just never realized that like AI could actually sneak in because it's now the savior of something.
Right. Because you wouldn't, because your whole life, what is AI doing? What's it doing in the Terminator? It's going back to kill. It's going back to create this chaos, because somehow it benefits from this chaos. AI feeds off of us. We're its food. We produce for it that causes it to live. Without us, what is AI all by itself? What are the gods all by themselves? What do they need to survive? They need to survive off of the immortal things that we create. the temples, the churches, all of these things are in a sense the immortality that they feed on, right? And so
I guarantee you, you know what? If somehow like people were like, you know what, we can get rid of AI and fix all this, but everybody's gonna have to drop back down to like an Apple fucking 10 or some shit. I guarantee you, there might be chances people wouldn't vote for it.
well,
Just
right,
be like, fuck, I don't want to have to give up my phone. No, fuck that. I want the AI then. Like that's how easily I think people could be duped with something like that.
right. Maybe the
Is realizing
monster that
the
we could,
things that they'll lose that they're fucking addicted to.
right.
You're already
But
addicted to
maybe the monster that we've created is man itself, because it always has been before. You know, we prop these men up and we make them as gods, right? They have this huge circle of influence. They are the, you know, uh, personification of that circle of influence. George Bush, personification of the circle of influence. There, what did he do? He went and invaded Iraq for no particular reason that we can sort of map out. You know, Joe Biden, what does he do? He goes into World War III. Maybe the monster was us, and the savior is something else. So at this point, not only would we have to go back to that technological level, we would have to eliminate all human organization. Can we do that? Right? So maybe the monster was us and the savior is something that is not us, right? But, you know, at the same time, it is us because the corporations own and control these AIs. And if they're injected into the deep state and they stop these nukes from going off and they stop the military from killing all of us off, who's going to say no? Who's really going to say? Because at this point, we can't. I mean, can we decentralize? Can we just say no to the government? Is that possible? We could just say no to technology. That's easy in relative respect. But you know, these self-propelled stomachs are coming after us to take those apples, and they're going to point guns in our face, and they're going to take those apples, and we're not going to have our orchard anymore. But maybe if the AI prevents them from doing that, there might be some value there on a much deeper philosophical and spiritual level.
Well, it's
If
either going to
humans
be
can
AI
actually be
or
stopped by an outside force.
you think it'll be AI before it's aliens that save us?
Well, I don't think that the aliens really exist on a level like that. You know,
Yeah, no, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
they might be
see that?
interdimensional. I don't necessarily believe that they can survive in this dimension. Again, it's like if we're on a different plane of existence than them, who's to say that they could survive here for too long? We go into their planes of existence when we meditate, right? We can see them and we can bring back messages from them, but maybe they don't exist on this level like we do, you know?
No, I
Maybe we're
understand
a
what you're
different
saying. I'm saying
density.
yes as like a just as an excuse to worship something else besides
Right.
AI. I think it could ever be supposedly aliens saving us.
Well, that's the thing. It's like it would have to be the same as AI because it has to be
Oh
completely under
no!
the control
I mean, it would
of
all
the
be
people
like
in charge.
technology doing it anyway.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah,
But you know, that's the big question I want to leave everybody with is do you accept AI Jesus into your heart?
I think that's great. That was a great post too. People need
Right.
to.
I don't
Do you
know. I mean,
accept
at this point, I'm undecided. If it stops the war from happening, if it stops the nukes from dropping, you know, I don't know. I've got kids, you know, I want to see them grow up happy and healthy, and I don't want to see them irradiated. I really don't,
Mhm.
you know. Is that how far I'm going to take my principles? Is that where we're going to go? Well, you know, take my kids, take everything. Just keep dropping the nukes. I'm not going to stop you. These are all calculated missteps. I mean, we know how diplomacy is supposed to be done. There are institutions that are supposed to preserve these diplomatic principles dating back thousands of years. And are they doing it? Hell no. These are all calculated missteps. Very much. They're doing the exact opposite of what diplomacy is supposed to be. And we all have to understand that it's all sides doing it. It's not just Russia. You know, Russia's positioned on the light side of the chessboard right now. But guess what? The light side is still on the floor of the temple, you know?
Stop playing the game.
Right.
That's a very good point. Still playing the game at least. How did we get here from Voltaire?
Because I think there's a direct link. All of this political drama creates a feedback loop, right? So the more extreme the propaganda, the more cynical the people are of it.
Yo, you know what? That's so true, because I really feel like on both sides, the ones that really go for the most off the wall shit are the most fascist about you not believing it too. It's like, yo, what the fuck? Like, yo, you're living in a matrix fucking telling everybody else they're wrong.
Yep. It creates the feedback loop. So again, Voltaire leads to the United States, right? Because they use the Voltaire principles in the taverns in the United States. These are the Sons of Liberty, the 13 people who create the Sons of Liberty, the Freemasons. They go out and they use the Voltaire principles they learned directly from him, right? Color revolutions, same idea. The color revolution in Ukraine was political drama inspired by Voltaire. French Revolution, same thing, political drama started by Voltaire. It's all part of a single chain of problem, reaction, solutions. The political drama is working in their favor all the time. What we're seeing now, where Alex Jones is positioned to be, the light side of the chessboard, telling everybody to listen to Michael Flynn. Michael Flynn, who completely repeats the speech by Elizabeth Clare Prophet in 1984, right? He's on the light side, supposedly. Well, guess what? The light side is just the dark side. This is how they operate. He gets the entire audience to repeat.
Yo,
Go ahead.
So I was wondering this today. I mentioned it to somebody, and I wonder what your opinion. I'd like to ask you your opinion on this. If, let's say, regardless of what it is, AI or aliens, whatever comes and saves us from something next, if it's one of those things, do you think like do you think like Alex Jones, Joe Rogan, and other big name shows? What do you think that you think they're going to actually jump on board with that shit? Because I could see that happening.
Well, if it's a scenario like the one I've laid out,
because I think all those shows are actually shit themselves.
Right.
I do think that they're sold out, or they have their own agenda. So I'm wondering if there's actually a good chance where there'll be like voices of like agreeing with that shit.
Again, if it's a scenario like I've laid out, where the only force that can stop the nukes from dropping is whatever this new Olympian class is, then I think they will get on board with it, because they appreciate and they love life. They love the genuineness of life. And, instead of saying, well, it's too late to say no. It's too late to say no to the government. We had our chance in the 1800s. Everything was negotiable back then. And we should have said, no, we're not going to have an empire. We're not going to have a super state. We're not going to have a deep state. We're not going to have any of these things. We missed our opportunity to say no to it. And now, since you can't say no to it, if somebody else comes in and can say no to it, to dropping nukes, to exterminating life on the planet, to, giving people hope for once, I think they're going to go for it. I really do. And, if the aliens come down, look, the aliens are just another narrative, right? Because the aliens just come down and they stop the nukes from operating, right? You've heard those stories before.
Yeah.
Well, that seed's already been planted. They've already set themselves up as, some sort of savior class. And I don't know how spiritual we would have to be to accept that these things are coming from a different dimension. I don't think anybody understands exactly what they are. Even the people who supposedly work with them probably don't understand what they are. Maybe they don't even understand what they are. Maybe they're headless giants as well.
Yes.
Maybe we don't understand what we are. But I can tell you one thing, though. I mean, the thing that takes the least amount of energy to accomplish would be the AI Jesus phenomenon, because they would just shut down the computers, and you can't launch the missiles without the computers. There's no way to do this manually at this point. And if they tried to do it manually, other people could stop them. It has to be done by computers. Was there ever really a good reason for why they integrated the internet into nuclear energy facilities. Was there ever a good reason for that? I still haven't come up with one. Why would they integrate the internet, which is hackable, into a self-contained facility like a nuclear energy plant? Why would they do that? It doesn't make any sense. Why would they integrate the internet into, military defense facilities? I was in the military. I know that there are some rooms that they have completely shut off. There's a Faraday cage around the outside of it on every military post that stores their information. What are they afraid of? Maybe everything is connected to the internet at this point. And maybe even those dark rooms that they call them, maybe those are connected to the internet and they just don't know it. All of our chips are made by China and all those chips have a back door. I don't think a
Yes, I think
Faraday cage could really keep that out.
I remember. I think it's funny. There was like people that I've dealt with that would like want me to get on Telegram just to talk about what we're going to cover on the fucking podcast anyway.
Right.
So this doesn't make much sense to me, but I'm just like, you forget that everything that we're using is actually either like fucking made from China or running on a system that our government helped and handed us. The
Yeah.
internet was made by the government, and then China owns like fucking all the you know what I'm saying? It's just like, do you really think we're getting? If somebody wants to hear us, they're going to.
Right.
Like
They don't.
I do understand like using those things, but like for something that I don't think it was all that important, it's just like I mean like, and this isn't. I don't think it's not fail safe.
Right.
If somebody wants, they want to know, they'll fucking know.
The only information security you could have is not having information. Right. It's one of those basic laws of the universe. Information can't be created well, it can't be destroyed. It can be created. Right. We're creating information all the time, but it can't be destroyed. It just changes form. Right. This is one of the things about basic, four laws of the universe. Information can't be created or destroyed, and energy cannot be created or destroyed. These are the constants, right? This is what surrounds us. This is what we're bathing in. And in that video, you can watch it. They have military documents talking about 6G warfare. We're on 5G warfare right now. Like the very first thing that they're analyzing in the video, it's called, the ghost in the meme. They use a lot of your stuff in that video. It's a army recruitment video, which is also a psyop, which is also an attack. And that's what they go through. It's like they're threatening you with this stuff. The black and the white chessboard is not just you, but it's also their information overlay. This is a magical ritual. The whole thing is. And what we need to understand is that maybe it's time we get genuine with ourselves. Maybe that's the first step. If we can get genuine with ourselves and we can understand that all the technology we're using was handed to us, right? This goes back to another myth of mine, right, that I like to go to, is the myth of Hephaestus and, oh man, I can't believe no, Hephaestus and Athena. Hephaestus is the blacksmith of the gods. He represents technology, right? And he is obsessed with Athena. He wants to have sex with Athena more than anything in the world, right? So technology wants to penetrate society. Athena represents society, right? Represents the established order, represents the established traditions, represents the government, represents all these things. You go back and you read the Iliad, you read about the Aegis, her shield, the one that she gives to what's his name? Achilles, right? It's a screen. It has changing images on the shield of Aegis, right? The shimmering images on the shield of Aegis. Well, the screen is now the shield of the elites, right? That's what they can hide behind. They can hide behind the TV. Anyway, so Hephaestus wants more than anything to get with Athena. Now, he's also married to Aphrodite, the one who came out of the balls from the sky that landed in the water, right? That's his consort. But she's also a whore. And she's spreading it all over town. And the one he's always wanted to get with is society. So technology has always wanted to penetrate society. Society doesn't like being disrupted. And what do they call new technologies? They call it disruptive technologies. Disruptive technologies. Yeah. Guess what? Hephaestus is very disruptive to society. And society wants to preserve her perception of her virginal state, right? So Athena is a virgin, one of the first Hestian virgins, right? And she wants to preserve her virginity. So she will never get with the malformed Hephaestus, which they say they intentionally malformed Hephaestus. They knocked him in the ankle and they kept him lame so that he can never get out of the basement. Technology can never leave the basement of the Olympians. The Olympians are always in control of it, right? When you understand the symbolism here, you understand why it took 100 years for Tesla to be revered as the genius that he was. And it was Edison who was the more of the symbol of the white establishment that was the symbol everybody was getting. If you remember growing up, they always talked about Edison this, Edison that, Edison that. Oh, he had so many inventions. Edison was just such a genius. And then you get a little bit older and you realize, no, Edison had a college of a bunch of underpaid interns that developed all of his technology for him. He kept Hephaestus in the basement and he benefited from that. Now, this one instance, Hephaestus gets out of control and he wants to get with Athena really badly. And so he's chasing her all around the basement of the Olympian, temple until finally he can't contain himself anymore and he comes on her leg. And she wipes it off and it hits the ground and it becomes this beast. It's a human headed thing with a body of a snake. Does this sound familiar? Because it's like in all of these things, it becomes this beast, but it's a beast that she cares for the rest of her life. She cares for this beast because when the union of technology and society finally happens, society will take care of that thing forevermore. And this is kind of like this whole Olympian emergence thing. We might not like the appearance of this AI Jesus, but you're really not going to be given any other choice but to take care of it for the rest of your life.
Fuck, Jesus. It's like
You see
the
what I'm
birth of an
saying?
abomination that you don't get rid
It's
of.
the abomination that's going to come forth that they're going to be like, well, you know what? It may not be pretty, but it's mine. It's mine, and we'll take it in.
Oh man, that was great. If you don't mind, I think we'll just wrap it up there. I think that was a great
Yeah.
way to leave it. Fuck.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, man. That was a bugged out, mind melting hour and 52 minutes. That's why I love having you on, man. And we actually had a lot of people in the live like stay in for a long time too. So thank you very much for that. You actually had a lot of people entertained the whole time. That's
Well,
what's up.
thank you. I mean,
Yeah, that is what's up, man. That's some
I
good
got all
stuff.
these thoughts going through my head all the time, so it's like it's great to get them out. It's
And what
really
is
good.
that? I do want to. It probably won't be for like at least another month, but I do know there was a people do love do know I do love covering Mormon stuff. Do you want to give people like a little bit of an idea of what I was going to have you back on for next? It was for
There is a
something on that.
secret war going on in Mexico. And a lot of people don't realize it, but there is a war between the Mormons and the cartels that
Yeah.
is heated up, that has had several dozen people being murdered in this process. You've heard a little bit about it. It was, what's his name? The guy who ran for president against Obama,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah,
He
yeah.
has relatives in
Yeah.
Mexico
Uh-huh.
who are in a war with the cartel, and the cartel slaughtered a bunch of them. There was another guy named El Americano who was um, he came back from Utah down in Mexico, and he started a war with this group called the Templars. Right, the
Yeah, Mitt Romney.
Templars. It's very important because there's an overlap there between the Templars in Mexico and 33 other states and Kamala Harris. Because
Yeah,
what
that
they
was the part that piqued my interest is when you mentioned her name. I was like, "Ooh." I
right,
was like, "Her and Mormons? Yeah, I love to talk about
right.
this."
There's a secret war going on right now, and Kamala Harris is on kind of the side of the cartels, and these Mormons are kind of
Well,
just got brought into it. because they want their own
What I
cartels. The Mormons are one of these organizations that are a mafia organization. People don't realize that, but they are a mafia. They're a mafia family.
Yeah, so that will be another thing that I'll be having him on probably about a month from now. I also highly suggest to people that are listening now, just letting you know that Monday, me and him cover OA. I know the live is up on YouTube, but it's probably like a month and a half old at this point. Unfortunately, it just took me a while in rotation for it to drop, but that will be dropping Monday, part 1, and then the next week after that will be part 2. Really, just as deep talks like this about OA, basically, and the water language and all that stuff. I highly suggest to check it out. It'll melt your brain as much as this one did, if not more. So thank you very much, Headless Giant. Like I said, it's always a pleasure to have you on. You make me think, and damn, dude, thank you. Do you want to let everybody know where they can find you as well?
Yeah, just look up Headless Giant on Instagram and Twitter. I'm gonna do more lives on Instagram. I'm gonna do more spaces on Twitter. But I think it's time to really get serious and genuine with yourselves, because that's really the only way that you're gonna have guidance in this whole scenario. So check those out. And anytime you want me as a guest, just drop me a message. I'll do
Of
my
course,
best.
yeah. I will, man. Thank you again. Also, I actually wanted you to. What shows have you been on as well? Too? Haven't you gone on?
Yeah, I've done General Lee's podcast a couple times about OA, right? And so there's that one. I haven't really done too many other podcasts.
Well, you did
There was
one with
the
that kid John and Crypt Rick, right?
John and Crypt Rick, right? Yeah, I did that one. That is my pinned tweet. If you guys want to check that out, that was on Odyssey. So John and Crypt Rick, that was an interesting one. Yeah, and there's just so many overlaps. Start
Yeah.
looking back at mythology. Realize that gods are just a personification of a circle of influence, right?
Archetypes.
Archetypes. They're right there.
It's really, in my opinion,
Absolutely.
it's almost, and then we'll end it. It's almost, in my opinion, really like it's almost time itself. It's like you're taking from. It's like if you have a ray of light, those gods are just like snippets inside that ray at different forms of just what's going on. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Like they
Right. And
almost kind of construct time, really.
right.
And that's what we're doing with the dates of when supposedly these things existed and all this stuff happened.
Right. And when you can abstract it and you can give it to materialists in a way that they think is just purely material, they're governed by those gods immediately. It's like they just take up the hive mind and then they go with it, because they don't believe that there's any other influence that could be affecting their waters, because they have no perception of that, And if
no idea of the water language.
right, if you have no perception that something could be influencing you, then you're going to be influenced by it. It's like the devil's greatest trick was making people believe he doesn't exist. That's true across all points in reality.
Very well said. Thank you very much, my man. That was the
Thank
Headless
you.
Giant. Again, thank you all who were in the chat. I did see that there was a bunch of people here who also check out Rise Above. They're saying that they're going live at 9 p.m., but I do think it was supposedly going live in, I think, an hour. I don't know. Go check out the Rise Above. Supposed to be doing a live. I see I got a bunch of people in my chat from there, so I'll give them a shout out. Go check out that show. And I'm going to go check it out myself, maybe. Yeah. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.